Okay, welcome to Ideastarter Module 1. We are exploring the challenge today, and I'm going to introduce a couple new tools. I'm going to define what those tools are, give you an example of how you can use them, and then we're going to hand it off to you. I'm also going to try to, anytime we're using these tools, I like to be able to work offline, and we work online so much lately, especially that it can be just become like first nature to just go to our computer. But if you have post-its, markers, paper, or even better, a whiteboard, feel free to bring those out for these things. So a problem statement or a vision statement, and for the purposes of this project, we're going to be using them synonymously, but it's a concise description of an issue that you want to address or a condition that needs to be improved. It's basically addressing what your idea is solving for. And so it just brings in the facts, it identifies the gap between what's currently going on and what you want the desired state to be. And if someone picked up your statement, they'd be able to understand more of the context of what's currently happening, why it's not ideal, and then how you think it should be addressed based on the facts that you have so far. So this is a statement that can and probably will change as you learn more about the problem and more about the solution that you're developing. So an easy way to think about this, and I have an example embedded within it, is the sort of who, what, how, when, where, and why. And we're going to look at an example of Fake Town, USA. They have a problem with recycling being contaminated. Processing costs are becoming so high that they might have to shut down the operation altogether. So who does it affect? Well, it affects everyone, really. It's the solid waste department, obviously. Even more specifically, it's the recycling sorters that have to sort through contamination. The Fake Town citizens, because that's where their taxes are going. Their recycling is actually not ended up getting recycled when they think it is. Residents who live near the landfill where that contaminated recycling is being taken, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll go more into these stakeholders in the stakeholder mapping. They know it's a problem because Fake Town hired 2 new recycling sorters. They spent a lot of money on education, assuming that it was an educational issue. When does a problem occur? Well, this is where you bring in the data that you have to say, okay, do we have data that shows a certain time when this became a problem? So for them, it's the US rules changed in 2018. Certain parts of the year tend to be worse. Where is the problem occurring? Well, Fake Town is really lucky in that they can see that they have contaminated routes that seem to follow the bus line. So there's some early insights in what could be contributors to this contamination problem. Why is it important? Well, this could be any number of things, and it's a combination of your intuition and what the evidence shows you in the world. So greenhouse gases are released from landfill sites. We want fewer materials in our landfill sites, especially when we can recycle them or upcycle. And then the landfill itself is projected to be entirely full very soon. From there, this is more of the vision part of your statement. So the how might we statement is just essentially making explicit the challenge that your idea is trying to solve. So in this case, how might we help residents reduce their recycling contamination without spending more city money? You can experiment with these. There's more than one way to write out your how might we statement, and I would suggest just playing with how it fits. You might not even think that you're solving a problem per se, but if you look close enough, you are filling a gap in some way. So try to acknowledge what is that gap that you're filling. The vision, well, in this world, all recyclables arrive at the recycling plant clean, intact, and easily sorted. And all that money saved on materials and staff is directed toward developing and implementing their residential composting program. So that's a good vision. You can become more visionary in yours, but this is pretty straightforward and direct, and that's just fine. Questions for the data and the stakeholders. This is an area that you will continue to develop because you're going to answer some questions, and then those answers will bring you to more questions, and that's exactly the direction that you want to go. So questions that we start with is like, what's the most common kind of contamination? Can we understand more about what kind of materials are ending up there that shouldn't? What are the perceptions and experiences around recycling and waste for the high contamination households? So can we get an understanding of like what people are having trouble with? What about the people that are doing this really well? What are their experiences and uh, lifestyles like? This can bring to light a number of different things. Um, and then of course, thinking about other people who are touching this issue, it's what are their experiences looking like? What do the sorters think? In many ways, they are our best experts into how to solve this problem. So from there, we go into stakeholder mapping. And a stakeholder is a person, a group, an organization, or an entity that has an interest or concern in the solution, or it can affect or be affected by your actions, objectives, and policies in this process. So there might be a lot of stakeholders, not all of them equally are involved in your project development. So we're going to focus on the most relevant, the ones who will be most impacted or can have the most influence on the development of the project. And then we're going to map out the stakeholders. So it's just a way of visualizing your key list of stakeholders as they relate to your idea and ideally each other. So there's a lot of ways to do this, and we're going to go through one. So here's your bright idea, just sitting there on its own, living its life. The people that are, and entities, I should say, that are surrounding directly your idea, the people that are closest to your idea, your inner circle, as it were, are your core stakeholders. So these are the people that add or get the most value from your idea. So they can be users of the product, they could be partners, they could be key collaborators, they all go right here. The direct stakeholders are a little bit less essential, but they still engage with, they have the power to impact your idea, but they're not necessarily, you could make the thing without them. Let's put it that way. So that might be the differentiator, is you can make it without them, but you'd rather have them on board, and it's helpful to engage them. And so on the outskirts of all this are your indirect stakeholders. So these might be the entities that actually don't come to mind right away, but if you're bringing in that systems thinking, they are affected by your idea without directly interacting with it. So they can still be interested, they can still be threatened or burdened by it, or they can benefit from your idea. And it's helpful to begin thinking about who are on the outskirts of that. And so taking our example of Fagtown, and this is not an exhaustive list, core stakeholders might be the recycling collections and sorting staff, the Fagtown residents, especially those who are the high contaminators, right? So we need to know like what's going on with high contaminators. The direct is also, the rest of the department, other Fagtown residents, probably the ones that maybe, don't have as much of an issue with recycling. Someone else might choose to put those in core as well. And so that's sort of your call. And as you develop how you want to do your research, you get to decide who goes where. The indirect stakeholders are residents living near the landfill. So we don't necessarily, they're in another town. We don't necessarily know how their lives look. They don't impact the contamination from our city's operations, but they are indeed greatly impacted by it, right? And so wildlife, we think of the natural environment, trying to get away from just thinking about human stakeholders. There are definitely other aspects here, especially it's really easy to draw those lines with something like recycling and you thinking about environmental safety. So now it's your turn. This is basically your opportunity just to start putting in thoughts, building out your problem statement here. This is something that I can look at and see if you have a question coming up or if you're not able to fill out a box. Some of these boxes you're going to fill out more thoroughly than others, and that's totally fine. Same with this page. You have your how might we statement. I encourage you to try at least writing 2 how might we statements and just seeing how different ones feel, because they can easily lead you to a different way of thinking about your problem. And so it's just a good practice to get your mind creatively thinking about how am I solving the problem? Is this the right or best way to attempt at solving the challenge in the way that I've understood it? The vision, write what the world looks like. You know, what does a world in where your idea is thriving and flourishing look like? And you might find more inspiration writing or drawing this on paper, and I would encourage you to do so. On the right side of the screen, we have the questions for data and stakeholders. And so this will be a growing list. Start just throwing them down. They don't have to be profound questions. They're just things that you don't know about your idea or about the context. And it's good to make those explicit early on. So don't get overwhelmed by all this text, but this will help you build your stakeholder list. Before you put them in those concentric circles, I want you to brainstorm a list of stakeholders without screening them, without prioritizing. Prioritizing is just going to happen on its own, but try to just put it all out there. You can use the list on the left side of the page to help you think about other entities, but just make that list, because on the next page, and don't freak out about all the text here, but then we're going to analyze. This is how we start to prioritize. So this is, again, you're bringing in your intuition about how you think about your solution and the expertise that you have into solving the challenge. You're analyzing your stakeholders of, does this stakeholder have information? Are they really important? And then you're just parsing them out. You're mapping them out. On the right side, we have some helpful questions that you can ask. I'm not going to read through them all right now, but you have this slide deck. And you have this, you can pause it right now and think about this. But some questions around, who are the primary users of the solution? Conversely, who's on the back end? So start to list them here. This is if you're working on the computer and you want to just put them in those 3 columns. Who's your core, who's your direct, who's your indirect? However, if you want to do this off the computer, now is your time to do that. So I have a very rough draft example on the right side of the screen where I drew 2 concentric circles, and then I just let the outermost area hold all the indirect stakeholders, so you don't really have to draw 3 circles. They can just sort of sit there in the periphery. But write those stakeholders after you've done all your analyzing in the appropriate circles. And don't, overthink it. Just go with your gut and use some of those prompts to nudge you into thinking, can I think more deeply about fake town businesses? For instance, this is the example that we've been working with. Are there different kinds of businesses that we could parse out? Are there different kinds of community organizations? Households are listed here right in the core of the idea. What about parsing those out? Are there different things that we want to think about, different demographics that we want to understand experiences better? The department, so we have the leaders, we have different pieces of that department as well, and those experiences will look different too. So use this as an opportunity to understand, like, how can we parse out different stakeholders, and then using the Post-it notes, write the question that you have for each stakeholder and just place it near that stakeholder. You don't have to necessarily hit every stakeholder. Start from your inner circle and work out. That will give you a sense of what are the most important questions that we have to answer first. So where there's a notable relationship, and this isn't required, but this is something that if you're interested in logging, you can draw a line between the two entities. So I have two examples here, very simple. I didn't overthink this clearly, but you can write what the relationship is on that line and put an arrow directing on what is doing what. So we have a community organization. Well, they serve Fake Town households. That's, good to know and good to reference. Keep this on hand, keep your map on hand nearby as a reference. So don't just scrap this, or you can take a picture of it and keep it on your computer. So as you continue developing your idea, you have this for reference and you'll get better questions. I always keep my Post-it notes nearby for the same reason. So have fun. Reach out to your mentor or myself for support. Don't worry about having everything filled out. But these are the pieces that I'd like us to begin to talk about in our next cohort session, which is a very brief description of your idea. Everyone has great ideas already. So just including your first thoughts around how might you frame a how might restatement, and how would you begin to describe your project vision. So this should be something that you already came in with. And then identifying a key stakeholder or two. So who's your core user, or who's a key collaborator that you're going to bring in? And then naming at least one question that you have for the data or the stakeholders, like what's one burning question that you want to answer as soon as possible. And so that'll get us going for our first cohort session and set us up for module 2.